Mini episode 1218 of the FDH Lounge is brought to you by Sportsology, delivering unconventional columns and webcasts about sports, TV, music, movies, and more. Follow them on the web at sportsology.com.
The FDH Lounge. You'll want to schedule your life around it.
A long time ago, on a gloomy, wet Cleveland spring night, two men stand alone amidst the late-night drizzle. Their voices echo across the vacant station parking lot as they debate the merits of the great American radio show that have been missing for far too long. On that night, an idea was born. That idea became the FDH Lounge. Welcome to the FDH Lounge.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to FDH Lounge Mini Episode 1218. This is FDH Managing Partner Rick Morris here with two of our fellow FDH Lounge original dignitaries, and this is another version here in our continuing series of the 2020 NFL Draft, and this is specifically part 4 that we have, and this is our review of the draft for this year. And as we're getting into it, and going through and looking at the winners and losers of the draft that we are seeing here at this early time, in our estimation personally, as well as with the rankings that we have, and you can find it up at the FDH Lounge Multimedia Magazine, the FDHLounge.blogspot.com, specifically 2020 FDH NFL Draft Rankings, doing this off of the Jason Jones Top 75 Overall Players, and then specifically from there, how teams did in filling their top needs by a mathematical formula, and then a mashup of the two formulas in terms of talent and filling needs, a more comprehensive thing across the board here. As is always the case, or almost always the case here when we are talking NFL draft on the show, our panel is inclusive of 3 original FDH Lounge dignitaries, myself, our senior editor Jason Jones, and FDH Lounge original dignitary Chris Galloway. So Jason, it was your top 75 that we were going off of for the rankings here. That's the baseline for a lot of what we're doing in the analysis, and I look forward to breaking this down with you.
Yeah, this was an interesting draft on many fronts. It looks like we got a lot of teams that feel like they maximize value, especially in day 1 and day 2. I don't think I see anybody that just did a straight up A+. But there are some teams that did some surprising jobs, and we'll get to some of those. And then there's some teams that just straight up went to bed. And I hate to be blunt about it, but there's some in there that are true head scratchers.
They really did in some cases. We will talk about that, and these are not necessarily predictable quarters where that happens, so to speak. Of course, our other panelist today, you can catch this at facebook.com/the FDH Lounge. He and I doing a live Zoom during the first round of the draft, or the better part of the first round anyways. And it was very entertaining, as per usual, to get on there with my old friend Chris Galloway and break it down such like we were going to do today. So, Chris, good to get back on with you, my man.
Always a pleasure, Rick. Always enjoy talking draft, my man.
Yeah. That the 3 of us, it's always outstanding whenever we get a chance to do this. And I'm going to start on this first one with you, Jason, because Chris and I were kind of wading into this, like I said, on the Facebook stream the other night. As far as the presentation of the draft itself, this is going to be a year that we'll always remember. I mean, hopefully this is the only year it ever has to be like this. Whether there are features, and I'm already seeing it now, like, oh, they should continue to incorporate these things into the draft from here on in. You know, on a voluntary basis, if you want to use Zoom and you want to use remote stuff, fine. But I hope that our society is not in a crisis like this again next year, the year after, any of the years after, to where we have to do it this way. So, first and foremost, the unified presentation here, there was no separate NFL Network coverage. It was all just together with ESPN, NFL Network, and ABC, all with the same feed. I'll start with you, Jason, because like I said, Chris and I broke it down a little bit the other night already. Thoughts on how it shook out with the remote draft all the way around?
Well, overall, I didn't mind it. Now, I absolutely would echo your sentiment that I'm okay with this as long as it's necessary. And I hope, specifically because I plan on flying me and my son out when they have So I'm really hoping that doesn't change, and I really want him to get full majesty of the effect. But I will say this, and pardon the joke reference, but the one thing that I actually stopped watching the actual feed and just started pulling up CBS Sports and just watching their feed.
Mm-hmm.
Because the whole Roger Goodell as no Vanderhoff from Wayne's World was starting to get a little old.
Yeah.
Like, I get it, and it's fine. I thought for the first round he was cute or whatever. But, by the beginning of the third round, the guy looked like he was going to keel over. And, I'm sure they could come up with more creative ways to do it that would aesthetically keep you on your toes a little bit, which is what we're used to. We're used to seeing the video packages, commissioner, the NFL Network, or the ESPN staff. It moves. The draft moves around. So, visually, there's a thing that they've mastered there, and this sort of was different. Now, we're doing the best of what we got, and I'm perfectly fine with that. But, yeah, the whole Goodell in his basement, I think that should get kind of worked in throughout the draft, but I'm okay with it.
Well, it was one of those things, and I would agree with what you're saying there. And I got to say, Chris, this is something that we didn't focus on as much when we were doing our Facebook live stream the other night, largely because, again, we were more focused on going through and talking about what was happening. We were occasionally taking note of what was on the screen, but one of the things that became clear to me subsequently, especially through social media, was I understand that this is a different year, these are tough times, but the whole tragedy palooza that they seem to have going on, like every other prospect, it was a deal of like, as an infant, his torso was used unsuccessfully to plug a major stab wound on his grandmother's abdomen. Like, I don't know why we had to hear about the worst moment of everybody's life in going through and in talking about this. I know you think I'm usually excessively grumpy about these things, but that was one of the things that I took note of.
Well, ESPN has to sensationalize everything, unfortunately. Everything is clickbait, and
right.
I think their lack of other content, it was like, they're sort of like, what else do we do?
Mm-hmm.
They're not getting the savvy human interest stories to the degree in the interviews in person the way they normally would. So, they kind of went in that direction, which was just awful.
Right.
Overall, I thought, production-wise, I thought it went really smooth, considering we had everybody all, for all intents and purposes, in the basement. And, so from that point, I thought it was fun. I'm with Jason. I enjoyed the Goodell in his Barca Lounger element there for a while. I didn't mind it at all even at the end. I actually kind of liked it by the end when he looked like he just needed a scotch and looked like everybody's grandpa ready to fall asleep. I kind of, for as much as everybody can't stand Goodell, myself included, it did help to humanize him a little bit. But from that standpoint, I kind of actually liked the way they did the draft. It wasn't so over the top, with all the fireworks and just totally ridiculous that I think it's in some ways that this thing has become. We've even seen a couple of GMs have actually now said, you know what, I'm going to be rethinking our approach to things after, next year. Do we really need to be working 15-hour days in the off-season on all this analysis and draft, pre-draft work? So there's a couple GMs are actually saying, you know what, this is kind of an eye-opener that maybe we are a little too over the top. And that kind of brings me into one thing, which is I thought my impression of the draft was, and maybe this is a function of these guys not overthinking things because they weren't focused on pro days and private workouts and all the other nonsense. Like, they had to rely a lot more just on their college tape of these players.
Yep.
So it felt to me like most of these teams did pretty well in terms of need and value. I saw far less what I thought were reaches. I saw far more teams addressing, better job of addressing need with, and combining that with value. Maybe that comes from overthinking it in terms of some of the activities that didn't go on, and okay, now be ready to gasp Browns fans who just cannot seem to grasp the idea of what analytics are. This also might have been an exposure because of this that these teams had to rely on analytics and their analytics teams even more so than their football guys. And I wonder if that is a result of what we saw the last 3 days in terms of what I thought was generally quality drafting by most NFL teams.
Yep.
And I wonder if we'll see a shift in the future. And I'm also curious to see how this draft does compared to the past one to see if there are less busts.
Yeah, very much so on all of that, because something we were talking about during our live stream the other night, Chris, I was referencing any number of conversations that I'd had during the week off air with FDH Lounge dignitary Ben Chu, who was looking to address a lot of this stuff from a handicapping perspective. He was going into that pool over the weekend, and he had some mixed results on this, some successes and some lack of successes. But in terms of how it was going to play out, I thought potentially going in that it might be more of a chalk-type draft than usual, and indeed that is exactly what I thought it ended up being. And that's a thing where ultimately, Jason, I know that you probably have some thoughts on that, you had teams that were doing a little bit less, again, maybe overthinking or things like that, but it seemed like it was playing in a little bit more predictable of a manner than usual. And indeed, if you look at our mock drafts at the top, you and I had a lot of success in that. You and I both nailed the same number of picks overall, which I think was 6, which was fairly decent. If we were using the system that we had in the draft guide there, Pro Football Draftology 2020, available on the main page at FantasyDraftHelp.com, you would have won the tiebreaker because you hit your 6th pick later than I did. You got the pick that Miami had of Austin Jackson. But especially towards the top, it was a little bit more predictable, it seems like, than usual. Less kind of weird stuff than usual. And to me, I think Chris is right in sort of drawing a line from that to what the circumstances were this year.
Yeah, there was some interesting things here. For starters, let me just jump on what Chris was saying, and hopefully it's just a microcosm of the effect of the situation we're in on even a macro level, because even I'm like, I don't think I need to go play as many errands as I used to. But, yeah, there's something to all of this, and I think it would be really intriguing. I hope at least one team tries this, but as we were going through it and seeing what Chris is referring to, seeing that, yeah, there was especially early, there was a dramatic lack of drama.
Right.
Of thinking teams had to jump real high to get that one guy, probably because they looked at the tape, and then compared to the tape, he also jumped off the page, combine-wise, pro day-wise, whatever. So yeah, I think there may be something to that. What would be really cool is if at least one team, when this is over, goes in and says, we're going to parallel this whole process and have, a few guys that just go tape only, and then a few guys that do it the old way. And then at the end, see where they come in. Like, see how far off they are. Because it might be that we're unable to get out of our own way when it comes to all of the stuff that isn't tape. So, it's a very intriguing situation. And then as it pertains to this draft specifically, lack of trade, especially early. No one really reached all that much. I know some people were questioning the Giants' 4 pick, but if those listening to us now go back and check our pre-show, they're going to notice that we talked really high on Andrew Thomas.
Yes.
So that I don't think surprised anybody here. So yeah, I mean, I don't think I saw a real legitimate first round reach until halfway through, and at that point, is it really all that much of a reach? Probably not. So yeah, I think this dynamic creates something different here, and we may not be done with what we just lived through from a drafting perspective and a scouting personnel perspective, not a wide perspective. So it's very true. I can't wait to see how that unfolds, and I do agree that especially in the early going, I think there's a lot of teams that made solid picks where you didn't see a whole lot of teams moving 15 spots to get a guy they, maybe shouldn't have traded up for anyway. So it's interesting.
It really was. And I want to ask you, Chris, because you've talked about this on the show repeatedly in the context specifically of the Browns and with Paul D. Podesta and what they're trying to do in terms of any kind of process moving forward and an engineered approach to how you go about things. Do you expect that there are going to be multiple teams out there that are going to try and break it down in a manner such as what Jason suggested there, in terms of what did we do differently this year and where did it work better and where did it work worse? Do you think that is going to be common for, I won't say all teams, but many teams to take out of the process this year and figure out if the circumstances may have inadvertently helped lead to some successes moving forward?
Well, I think the smart teams will do that. And I think there'll be a bunch that won't. But I think the smart teams will be very introspective and want to sit back and not only analyze the results of their draft, but also the other teams that they know maybe operate similarly. So if you're Stefanski and Barry, do you want to pay special attention to New England, Philadelphia, Minnesota, other teams that are probably more heavily analytically driven? I think you do. You want to pay attention to see how well they get on their picks, because that's a clue as to process and whether the process this year was a good one, and maybe they ought to spend more time on the stats and the tape and less on the workouts and all the other extracurricular stuff that goes on at the end of the college football season. I think smart teams will do that. I think they'll look at their process. They'll look at what they did. Like I said, you've got a couple GMs that have already come out and said, why are we spending so much time grinding away in the office in the off-season, all this stuff, when we actually went into this process feeling pretty good and basically working probably half as much? Are they finally coming to the realization that a lot of corporate Americans come to, which is, the old cliche of, work smarter, not harder and longer. So it'll be interesting to see. This is sort of like the forced upon petri dish of experimentation. So from that standpoint, I really liked what happened this year. And just another wrinkle, and I know I mentioned to you the other night, Rick, I think this draft is a great win for Cleveland. And I'm not talking about the football, I'm talking about the city. Because the prospect of Cleveland having to follow the gamesmanship and the pizzazz and the bright lights of Vegas to host the NFL draft,
Yep.
I thought was going to be a real letdown and a real bummer for the city of Cleveland. The people will be like, no, it was okay, but man, it wasn't Vegas. Ooh, it wasn't, Nash Vegas before. I mean, it was just Cleveland. So in this sense, this is actually a win for the city of Cleveland, because there was a draft celebration this year. It comes back next year, and it's in Cleveland, so it'll be a much bigger deal in person for a lot of people than it would have been coming off of a Vegas draft. So from the city's standpoint, getting to sort of re-kick it off, and now Vegas, they've announced that Vegas will now host it in 22 to make up for what they lost this year. What a great win for the city of Cleveland to not have to follow all that, to sort of be the ones to re-kick it off and to sort of reinvent it. So, make lemonade with lemons. I think it's a great opportunity for Northeast Ohio, so I'm kind of excited about it.
I agree, and I'm looking forward to getting a chance to do something like this in person with both of you guys next year with Jason coming in. And clearly we have a lot to look forward to with it coming to America's North Coast next year. In terms of this year, how it went, as I referenced before, you can find it at the FDH Lounge Multimedia Magazine, the fdhlounge.blogspot.com. The 2020 FDH NFL Draft Rankings. I'm just going to give you the top 10 out of the 3 different categories, and we'll go through and we'll talk about how different teams did on this. First of all, raw numerical rankings. This is simply just off of the Jason Jones top 75 overall. 75 points to the top player on the list, all the way down to 1 point for the 75th guy on the list. Here's how teams did on that. Number 1, Miami. Number 2, Jacksonville, tied for 3rd between Dallas and the Giants. 5, Carolina. 6, the LA Chargers. Tie for 7th between Minnesota and Washington, and a tie for 9th between Cleveland and Dallas. Up next is the rankings based on team needs, how teams did on that. 1, Houston. Tie for 2nd, Cleveland and Minnesota. 4th, Detroit. 5th, Jacksonville. Tie for 6th, Arizona, Atlanta, Miami. Tie for 9th, LA Chargers, New York Jets. And then the mashup of the other rankings, balancing top talent overall with what teams did to address their needs. Tie for 1st, 3-way tie. Detroit, Jacksonville, Miami. Number 4, Minnesota. 5, Cleveland. 6, the LA Chargers. 7, Carolina. Tie for 8th between Houston and Washington. Tie for 10th between Arizona and Dallas. So, Jason, I know you and I talked off air a bit about Miami, and in terms of how they were just overwhelming in terms of the number of top players taken. 6 players out of your top 75 overall. Not all of those were for the areas of greatest need, which is why they didn't score as highly in that category, but they got excellent depth in those areas and got a ton of value and really just dominated the overall standings just in terms of the top players available.
The thing with Miami that's so interesting is it was a good job on multiple fronts. Straight out of the gate, love. Days 1 and 2. Top and bottom. Based on what they got, where they got them, what they, conceivably are giving up to get them, all that stuff. I'm one of the people who didn't hesitate on Tua. I get it. I know he's coming off of a rough injury. But Miami hasn't been good in a while, so let's not rush it and just get the best talent player you need there. And I think they got that. Austin Jackson was probably my number 5 outside the Big 4. So that's solid. And what really is impressive, and you don't hear this from me very much, is Robert Hunt from Louisiana. And then, Solomon Kinley from Georgia.
Yes.
Really trying to, it feels like they're trying to fix that offensive line overall, which would be nice. And then Raekwon Davis was the guy I loved last year, if you guys recall.
Yep.
You get him middle of the second, when you probably are looking at late first, early second last year, if he'd come out. So real solid all around. Even the corner from Auburn I liked a lot. Now he's not up in that Ohio State police range where you're getting Okuda and Arnett, but after that, he's right in there, right in that top 5 to 8 corner list. So I love what they did. And then when you look at it, not just prospects and names, but look at types of players. So you've got your hopefully A-list elite quarterback, you've got a left tackle, and you get some help on the defensive line and secondary. But what's really intriguing is they even went to the trouble to go long snapper and what I imagine will be special team specialist in round 6 and 7. So very well-rounded, complete, sort of addressing a little bit of everything. And I think that they're a much better team today than they were week 2.
Very much so. By the way, just caught this quick misstatement on my part here. I mentioned Dallas twice in the top 10 for top overall talent. They're actually tied for 9th. It's Detroit that was tied for 3rd with Dallas, and the Giants just on the top 75 scale. And that actually leads me, Chris, to something I want to ask you about, which is there are some teams that we see up on the list here that might be a little bit more predictable in the top 10. Even a team like Dallas, which has had some pretty decent success in drafting over the years, Minnesota. Miami is not as surprising, perhaps, because they've got 1 year under their belts with this regime, and they did pretty good last year. But you have a number of teams that you might not necessarily expect to see this high up there. Jacksonville, notwithstanding my fondness for Tony Khan as a wrestling promoter, they haven't been that great at drafting in recent years. Same thing with Detroit, the New York Giants. Dave Gettleman is usually a favorite punching bag of mine. Washington, I understand that it's a new day there, and it's Ron Rivera calling the shots as opposed to the dweebs that they've had ever since they ran Scott McCloughan out of there. But the top 10 has some faces in there in terms of the pure talent that they were able to acquire that we're not necessarily as used to seeing.
Well, I think you're right, and I think everything Jason said about Miami is spot on. The other one that I think, I want to focus on a couple, and I know one of these is not in your top 10, but unfortunately for Browns fans, and again, some of this is just somehow how the metrics work, but I really thought I thought the Ravens just crushed this draft.
Right.
I just thought that they were picking up amazing value every step of the way. And I don't know, I didn't total up how many picks they had, but God, it felt like that there was every 5 minutes Baltimore was adding another future menace for the Cleveland Browns to have to deal with. It was very deflating for me as a Browns fan.
Yeah.
Watching them absolutely slay this draft. I thought Ozzie Newsome retired. He was phoning it in from Alabama. Why not? So the other one that and again, staying on the theme of woe is us, I thought the Bengals really did well.
Oh, yeah.
I thought they had another team that somehow, I don't know if that's their coach having an effect on Mike Brown, but they were grabbing absolute amazing talent at the top of every round. I know Logan Wilson, the guy that we were all high on, a lot of fans were high on. Every round started off with me, sort of crying about the fact that the Bengals were stealing somebody I wanted.
Right.
So it was kind of like tears in my coffee kind of thing. So that's, I think that bodes well for the AFC North in the future because in your top 10, the Cleveland Browns, I thought this regime did really well. I'm giving it a B+. Some at PFF have gone as far to say today that they're ranking them as an A+.
Wow.
Based on their board and their fact that the Browns, the value, which you're always talking about, Rick.
That's right.
Taking them. And that's including the fact that PFF is not high on Peoples-Jones. So they gave him an A+ regardless. I thought the Browns, I thought they clearly were disciplined, stuck to their board, tackling need directly, and when the draft come to them, it showed an amazing amount of discipline and professionalism that we haven't seen there in a long time. Dropping down a few spots, still getting dealt it out of Louisiana State, and adding the 5th round pick to pick up Harris, potentially your future center, or at least backup center and guard depth. You had no pick, a guy who was a 2-time All Pac-12 first team in the last 2 years, just from moving down 3 spots and getting the guy you wanted anyway. What discipline, and we haven't seen in a long time. So I think, again, just like the theme of this offseason has been with the Browns, I really like what this front office and coaching staff is doing in terms of who they're valuing and how they're going about building this roster. So that was a big test for Browns fans this past weekend. Was what see how they do this, and they pass. They pass with flying colors.
Well, and I want to ask you a follow-up question, Chris, before I go to Jason, because, again, you mentioned about Baltimore, and it is true. That's the one thing that none of these systems truly capture is how you're doing as far as acquiring depth in areas where you don't necessarily have holes. But that's a thing where, again, if you're going to be a championship-level team, you have to have a lot of depth. You look at Philadelphia a couple of years ago when they won the Super Bowl and how much depth that they had. And that was sort of Baltimore's style more so in this draft. They weren't so much going out there and filling gaping holes, and they didn't have any super high picks, so they were only going to be able to do so well on the top 75 overall rankings, but they did very well in those ways that were essentially non-traditional as far as how we look at this. There aren't too many teams that are in a position to be able to do that, but I will say this, and this ties into your Browns comments, that in the third round, again, subsequently, the Browns did get a linebacker finally, for which I was very happy. But when they got Jordan Elliott, the defensive tackle from Missouri, that was a very good value. I know PFF certainly thought it was a great value. But that was one of those things at the moment where I was kind of screaming for a linebacker. And like I said, thankfully they were able to do it later. But that was more reminiscent of what teams like Baltimore was doing and what San Francisco did in the first round when they took a replacement for Buckner. Even without Buckner, they have a tremendous defensive line. You wouldn't look at it and think, oh, they need to go and get a replacement for him right there, because they could have replaced him from within. But they built onto an area where they were already strong and got stronger. Baltimore did that with their whole draft. The Browns did that in the third round with the pick of Jordan Elliott, and maybe once or twice other times in the draft as well, in areas where they didn't have holes, but in getting stronger. So that's a thing where that might bode well for the future with the Browns.
Well, I think that speaks to the strengths of this Cleveland Browns roster now.
Right.
That it's not as weak and thin and lacking in talent than it used to be. So, when you have a roster like that, we saw this out of a lot of regimes, that's when you start reaching. That's when you start getting desperate. You start going to gamble more, and that's when you make mistakes. That's when you blow capital to try to get the guy. You just know this is the guy. You're not seeing that now. So I guess in some ways that's a testament to the last couple of years when the Browns have added quality to this roster. I mean, we all know we look at this offensive roster for the Browns, and there is, other than maybe your right guard position, there's no starter on that offense that is not either been a Pro Bowler or could be a Pro Bowler in the next 3 years. That offense is absolutely loaded. So Browns fans are going to have to learn, potentially, hopefully, what it means, what the draft means for successful franchises in the near future, which is doing what Baltimore's doing. It felt so weird and foreign to us as Browns fans because you had a disciplined front office that was sticking to their board and acting strategically and filling in very nicely in terms of depth. And we just haven't seen that in 20 years. We're not accustomed to a very efficient strategic draft process because we've had a roster that's typically half garbage, and it's going to get turned over every year, half the roster. So we're always used to, trying to hit the home run in every round. Who's the steal of this round? We've got to get that guy. We've got to risk it all because, we have nothing else. Well, not anymore. When you've got talent across the board, you can start to apply the strategy that successful franchises like the Ravens have done for years. So that's going to be adjustment for Browns fans. Used to that. Maybe the draft won't be as exciting for Browns fans anymore. Maybe it's finally not our Super Bowl.
Hopefully not. And in turning to you on the subject of the Browns, Jason, because I know you got some thoughts. The Browns are always one of the most interesting stories of the NFL draft. The one caveat that I would give I haven't looked it up specifically, but off the top of my head, the Browns, a lot of times in recent years, have fared well in our draft rankings afterwards. So that tells me that sometimes there are just players that all of us draft honks miss on. And the Browns appear to be getting a disproportionate number of those. But I think a lot of it comes down to player development as well, where the Browns have just been utter shite in player development for the last 20 years. So some of it is going to be you have to take this raw clay and make something out of it. That's going to be the challenge with them going forward. But leaving aside that depressing prospect of some of these guys potentially not making it,